Hello, brothers. This is Welton Bonner from DC, and we are back at it again. The topic I am covering is discourse analysis, especially focusing on the text linguistic side of things, but we'll see about that one. Um, so, this subject is a lot like eating an elephant, and as the old adage goes, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. And so, we're going to be, chomping away at this large subject that's multifaceted. But we'll start with the bigger picture. How does discourse analysis fit in all the other humanities studies? Then we'll go into a history of discourse analysis. Then third, we'll define discourse analysis. Fourth, we'll look at discourse analysis in action. Then we will look at some resources for further study and conclude. So, as I said, we have this big academic field of studies, then inside of that, we have the humanities, and then we have inside of the humanities linguistics, and that's the study of language and how people communicate and in general. And so, um, but inside of linguistics, there's several layers. And so, looking at the concentric circle, in the middle, we have the phonetics, which is speech sound. So any sound, But then phonology has the certain sounds that people make in certain languages in certain cultures to and so these basic languages in a certain culture. But then kind of zooming out, you have the morphology. So how do you put those phonemes together to form words? And then words, when you put them into groups, they form phrases and sentences. And that is the syntactical level of things. And so once you get into the sentence level, you have to start to think about, well, what does a sentence mean? And how like what does it is it actually saying when you put that sentence together? And then but then bigger than that is pragmatics. And it's like, well, in the big picture, in the context of discourse, what are you trying to say? And so that is what discourse analysis focuses on. It looks at the big picture context of a speech um, or any form of communication. It could be textual as well. And how does that big picture of the text shape that individual sentence? But also there's other components that we'll get into next. So how we define discourse analysis is important to us because um, discourse analysis is so large and the definitions are so multifaceted that it can be easy to get lost. But I think this definition really hones in, and I'll try to underline some things as we go. But the term discourse analysis is often defined simply as the study of language, okay, beyond the sentence, hence the name of my presentation. Okay, so we're moving beyond the sentence. It is a way of methodically examining the details of an oral or written statement. So notice that it can be oral or written. Okay, and it's longer than a single sentence. So we're looking at the kind of like not just the sentence, but how does this sentence, what builds off of this sentence or what came before it, and how does this fit right in there? But in order to do that, we must consider the creator of the utterance. So in our case, it's the author, uh, and then we have the recipient, and that would be the ancient Near Eastern context. Um, and then we also have the linguistic and social context. And so, not just that when Paul or Peter wrote those letters, they were writing to people who understood Greek, or and they had the Greek, language down, and they also had a shared social context. And so Discourse analysis is thinking about communication in light of all that. And so it's really a big picture facet, and I think it's a great facet in that way. And listen to this contrast. It says, unlike linguistic analysis, which focuses on such things as phonetics, morphology, semantics, and syntax, discourse analysis focuses on larger works of language and on what is achieved through them. And so um, the achieved through them is going to be Randall Pelton's presentation, but mine is kind of more so on the tools that we do, that the discourse tools, or discourse grammar is what it's called as well. Um, and so discourse analysis, an analogy that I like to use that I thought of was the double-edged sword. But I also put a question mark there because on purpose, because is it just two sides to the coin as Green would have us think? And so it is twofold. There's the pragmatic side, and then there's the text linguistic side. The pragmatic side looks at what is this language trying to accomplish, but the text linguistic says, well, what are the devices in the communication that help us know the discourse, help us to see the discourse and the flow and the pattern? What are the internal signs that help us follow the pattern, the story, the argument, and so the vision. And so, there's text linguistics is getting down to some grammatical things in detail, and that's where I'll be focusing. But the third facet of discourse analysis, that Green does acknowledge, however, he doesn't add this to his focus, but in the secular realm, um, of discourse analysis, this is a big deal. But it's the hilt of the sword, I like to say, yeah. But it's the socio-linguistic side of things, um, the Greek mindset, the things that go unsaid, the clothes that they wore, the everyday life. How does, the having to go to a well for your water versus having a sink that you can just turn on? How does that shape your communication? And so it plays a part. Um, and so and that's why I went to the three approaches versus just the dual, and this is based on Hodges, who is he does a handbook of discourse analysis, or no, not Hodges. Hodges wrote a paper on discourse analysis, and he's not this is more so the broader field of discourse analysis, but looking at the history helps us understand how does this intersect with theology. So a brief history of discourse analysis. Ferdinand de Saussure, he was a semiotician, and semiotics is the discipline of studying signs. And so Saussure, he just made a lot of he wrote a lot of prolific thought about semiotics and things. And so later on, a lot of scholars would build off of that, and some like Zelig Harris, and he's the one who coined the phrase of discourse analysis. And I'm not quite sure, I couldn't get into his work as deeply to see exactly where he connected with Saussure. And so I'm not 100% sure he's a descendant, an ideological descendant of Saussure, but I know for sure that James Barr is. And so James Barr is the one who kind of urged theologians to engage in linguistics. And so, he saw the value of it. And you can look at his work. It's in 1961. And so it's only 9 years after this finding. I mean, depending on how you look at that, but this finding is happening in this broader field of discourse analysis. And he got wind of it and is like, hey, this is very valuable for our biblical studies realm. And so, man, it is pretty cool. Um, And so the reception of discourse analysis in biblical studies is different based on the Testament. Old Testament has basically embraced it, but typically on smaller units, and they've typically focused on the text linguistic approach, and which is a good thing, but it's in my opinion, not complete thing. And so the New Testament has focused on larger corpuses, which is good that they're not just focused on smaller corpuses, but at the same time, it's not as influential and hasn't. I mean, at this point in time, though, that's the thing. Like when the person I kind of cited this from was writing, is actually Runge. Um, I think he wrote it in 2016, but I think studies has increased it from what I could find. There were several studies being approached from the discourse analysis angle, but maybe I think that there's room to grow, of course. But it's not much focus on pragmatics, and so I think that's a field to focus on if you're interested in a discourse analysis. But there's also reticence, and so um, let me see. Hopefully, I don't ruin this. There's a okay. I don't want to mess things up, but there's a quote from Daniel Wallace, and long story short, he's just kind of saying some of his um, concerns about discourse analysis and how it's a trend, and so he kind of just in his grammar stays away from that realm. Even though he kind of says something there that I'm not 100% in agreement with, but long story short, he eventually at least writes a forward in Runge's discourse grammar. So it's pretty cool. Um, and so just quickly, a few examples. If you look in your Hearing the New Testament book on, I think, let me see what page it is. On Yeah, it starts at page 230, and you see Green engaging with Luke, and you just kind of notice some things that are. I kind of want to compare and contrast the text linguistics versus the pragmatics, but um, Green he's concerned with sentences, and so just don't want to give you all the impression that sentences do not matter in discourse analysis. They matter greatly, but he mainly focuses on how they fit in the large paragraph, and not just the paragraph, but even the larger picture. And so in the larger picture would be called the context, and I really love that term, and because it helps you, makes me think of a coat that goes around my body. The coat that goes around the pericope is what has come before it and what will come after it, and how that shapes the communication that is happening in that pericope. I think that's like a great idea. Um, but he mainly focuses on pragmatics. He flows quite between he flows fluidly between grammar, some socio-historical notes, intertextuality, and so it's really cool, and it's just more pragmatics based, and maybe at least he shows the text. His treatment is more pragmatics based, and maybe at least showing the text linguistic that support the claims would ground them further. And so I think he could use a little more grounding in text linguistics. But then in contrast, you have Laos um, uh, from Lao and Ida. You have Laos. His treatment of Ephesians 1 3 through 14, and it's heavy text linguistics. And so you can even see in the outline how he's flowing these thoughts of the ideas. He goes, and so he pays close attention to structure and discourse markers. So you have adjectives, conjunctions, you have some lexemes, you have prepositions, all being emphasized and how they all fit together to make an idea. And so you elongate you my bad elongatas ha theos, and so that is the main sentence, and it's the heading, and then so that's the even though it's the adjective, he says it's the main heading, but then you have kathos, and then that's the conjunction, and it continues the idea of elongatas. And so then you have these three fold repetition of um, epainos, and so it marks the discourse with doxology. And so it's just pretty cool how he fixes these things in the order of the ideas based upon the actual grammar in the text. And so it's just some differences there, but but he does not go into the actual meaning. So what does that mean, or what is it meant to do? And so that's the pragmatic side of things. There's some peaks and falls really quick. um it helps us gain the big picture of a book with hard data. Thus, it sharpens our big ideas. And so it's also eclectic. So it allows for history, intertextuality, and lower levels of communication all together. And it helps us pull from it. So it's pretty diverse. And I think it's a good middle ground between, the grammatical, historical to the redemptive, methodologies of interpretation. And so, but there's some pitfalls. It is a language of its own with many dialects, and there's so many different approaches. And also, text linguistics alone, it only shows you the I guess the order of the thoughts, and it can help you get to the order, but it doesn't interpret the data. And so that's where the pragmatic points come. It's like, it doesn't it, and so we need both the pragmatic and the text linguistics. And the note about subjectivity, I'm not completely convinced it's subjective unless it's some of the social things. And so here's some resources. Just one I would highlight above all else is Logos's High Definition Bible. I just watched a video on that and it was amazing. And so, in conclusion, Discourse Analysis is a great tool. It has some weaknesses, but I think it's a blessing to us and our biblical studies. So I pray that you are encouraged to use this tool on your tool belt. Grace and peace.